Elliot Trenton had always lived a life that was predictable, perhaps even a little too predictable for his liking. As a cargo pilot in the far reaches of the galaxy, he often found himself charting courses between outposts and mining colonies that no one had ever heard of, transporting goods that no one would ever remember. It was a life without danger, without excitement, and for the most part, that was exactly how Elliot liked it. In a universe so vast, he had no desire to make waves. He was just a man in a cockpit, doing his job and getting paid for it. The monotonous hum of the ship's engines was like a lullaby to Elliot, who had long since grown accustomed to the rhythmic routine of his work. The vastness of space was quiet, peaceful in its own way, like a never-ending expanse of solitude. He didn't need the noise of bustling cities or the urgency of military missions. He just wanted the quiet hum of the ship and the endless stars outside his window. For the past 3 months, Elliot had been flying the same route. Cargo shipments, fuel deliveries, and mineral hauls. Nothing out of the ordinary. But today, something felt off. A faint beep echoed through the cockpit, breaking the silence. Elliot shifted in his seat, staring at the flashing sensor on his dashboard. It wasn't a signal he recognized. His fingers instinctively moved over the ship's controls, checking the system. The distress signal was coming from a place that didn't exist on any of his maps. The coordinates were not listed in any of the navigational charts he had. An unknown sector, deep in the uncharted dark of space. His ship's sensors picked up an ancient signal, pulsing through the emptiness of the galaxy. The transmission was brief, repeating the same sequence over and over, in a language that was neither human nor familiar to any known species. Elliot's brow furrowed as he studied the readout. It wasn't the first time he had picked up a random signal in the void, but something about this one seemed different. There was an urgency to it, a persistence that tugged at his instincts. His job didn't require him to investigate these kinds of signals, but the thought of ignoring it felt wrong. He wasn't the type to go looking for trouble, but Elliot was a man who trusted his instincts. They had kept him alive for all these years. He hesitated for only a moment before his fingers danced across the dashboard, redirecting the ship's course toward the source of the signal. As he adjusted the controls, he noticed that the usual calm of space had shifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. The stars outside the window appeared darker, more distant, as if something was looming on the edge of perception, something that Elliot couldn't quite place. The ship's systems hummed a little louder, a little more urgently now. It was as if the vessel itself knew that they were heading into the unknown. The journey to the source of the signal was uneventful. The hours passed like any other flight, with Elliot running routine checks and monitoring his systems. Yet, as the ship neared the coordinates, a sense of unease settled in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, or worse, that he was about to walk into something he couldn't possibly understand. Suddenly, the dark void of space began to give way to something else, something massive. As the ship approached the source, Elliot's breath caught in his throat. Ahead of him, suspended in the emptiness of space, was a vessel unlike anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, its silhouette barely visible against the stars. The ship was ancient, covered in strange markings that flickered with faint light, like dying embers. Its surface was smooth and organic in shape, almost as if it had been grown rather than built. Elliot's ship's sensors blinked with warnings, and the radar flickered wildly, struggling to comprehend the size and structure of the alien vessel. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, and Elliot's heart rate spiked as he tried to take in the impossible sight. This was no ordinary ship. This was something otherworldly. Elliot leaned forward, his fingers hovering over the controls. The vessel was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. There were no markings or signatures to indicate what kind of civilization it belonged to. Nothing in the database connected this ship to anything known in human or alien history. His scanners pinged again, sending off a warning about the ship's energy readings. They were unstable, but the vessel was still functional. Barely. Whoever had sent the distress signal, whoever had been on that ship, might still be alive. Swallowing his rising anxiety, Elliot adjusted his course. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Elliot Trenton, receiving your distress signal. Do you need assistance? He tried to keep his voice steady, but it sounded hollow, even to him. There was no reply. He tried again, more forcefully this time. This is Captain Trenton. I'm here to help. Do you copy? Silence. Only the hum of his ship's systems and the occasional crackle of static filled the empty space around him. Elliot's stomach tightened, his hands now gripping the controls. He had expected some kind of response, a call for help, a distress message that would explain what had happened to the crew. Instead, there was nothing. Only the eerie quiet of space and the haunting presence of the ship ahead. Taking a deep breath, Elliot guided his ship closer to the vessel. His ship's automated systems flared, warning him of the proximity to the ship's massive hull. As his ship drew near the opening of the alien vessel, an invisible force suddenly gripped it. The control panel began to flicker and lock up. Elliot's heart skipped a beat as his fingers struggled to regain control. The ship jolted forward, as if being pulled by some unseen hand. Before he could react, the force pulled his ship inside the alien vessel with a sudden, sharp motion. His ship shuddered violently as it passed through the entrance, but the pull released almost immediately. Elliot's ship floated into the ship's massive hangar, the atmosphere inside shifting from the vacuum of space to a strange, humid air, thick with unfamiliar scents. The hangar was dimly lit, and strange, pulsing patterns illuminated the walls, giving the whole area a ghostly glow. The sense of foreboding weighed heavily on Elliot as he looked around, trying to take in his surroundings. Something about the place felt wrong. He had entered the belly of a ship, but there was no sign of life. No crew, no communication, just silence and the glowing markings on the walls. Elliot felt his breath catch as movement flickered at the edges of his vision. Shadows shifted and shapes began to take form. Tall, slender figures emerging from the gloom. Their exoskeletons gleamed darkly under the faint light, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unsettling intensity. Elliot stepped back, his hand instinctively moving toward his blaster. He wasn't expecting a fight, but something about these beings made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. They weren't attacking, but they weren't friendly either. They moved in perfect unison, as though they were one being, watching, waiting. Before Elliot could react, the figure that stepped forward was not like the others. She was taller, her form regal and imposing. Her exoskeleton was intricately patterned, a dazzling array of lines that seemed to pulse with energy. She stepped forward with purpose, her violet eyes locking onto his. Her gaze was intense, as if she had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Without warning, she closed the distance between them, and to Elliot's shock, she wrapped her arms around him in an embrace. His mind raced as he froze in place, unable to comprehend what was happening. She pulled away slowly, her eyes studying him with a strange mixture of relief and wonder. "I have found you, human," she whispered softly. Elliot stood frozen in her embrace, his mind unable to process the reality of what was happening. His quiet, uneventful life in space had just been upended, and he had no idea where this strange journey would lead him. Elliot stood in stunned silence as the alien queen released him from her embrace. Her arms, though firm, had felt strangely reassuring, as if she had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The air around him seemed charged, heavy with something that felt ancient and powerful. The strange vessel's hum resonated through his body, and the faint glow from the walls cast shadows that seemed to move on their own. Elliot's mind raced, his heart still pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of the situation. The queen took a step back, her violet eyes scanning him intently. There was a softness in her gaze, yet an unmistakable authority, one that made it clear she was no ordinary being. Her presence was commanding, regal, and her form stood tall above him. Her exoskeleton shimmered with intricate patterns that pulsed gently with a light of their own, like veins of starlight running through her. Elliot couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine as she studied him, as though she were appraising something far more significant than just a simple human pilot. "You are the one I have been waiting for," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet filled with undeniable power. Elliot opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was scrambling to process the words she had just spoken. He was not some hero, some chosen one. He was a cargo pilot, just a man trying to survive in the vastness of space. How could she have been waiting for him? And why was she so sure that he was the one she sought? "I think you've got the wrong person," Elliot finally managed to say, his voice shaky. "I'm just a pilot. I don't know anything about your people. I'm just here because I found a distress signal." The Queen didn't seem perturbed by his denial. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. The silence in the hangar deepened as the tension in the air thickened. Her eyes bore into him, her gaze searching for something deeper, something that Elliot couldn't quite understand. "I am Queen Sarah," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of knowledge. "And you are more than you know, human." Elliot opened his mouth to protest again, but before he could speak, one of the alien warriors standing in the shadows stepped forward. He was tall and imposing, his body covered in dark, sleek armor that seemed to merge seamlessly with his exoskeleton. His eyes, glowing faintly, shifted from Elliot to the Queen, and then he spoke in a language Elliot couldn't understand. The Queen responded to him in the same alien tongue, her words flowing smoothly as if they were a natural melody. Elliot watched the exchange in confusion. Was she speaking to him? Or was she speaking to these warriors? He couldn't tell, and the language barrier only added to his growing sense of unease. "I know what you are thinking," Queen Sarah said, breaking the silence as she turned back to Elliot. Her voice was calm, soothing almost. "You do not understand, but you will. Soon enough." Elliot felt his stomach churn as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He had been just an ordinary man, traveling through space, following routine cargo runs, and now he found himself in the middle of some kind of ancient mystery. Something bigger than him, something that seemed to stretch far beyond his understanding, was unfolding before his eyes. And yet, no matter how much he wanted to turn and run, something inside him refused to let him go. "What do you mean?" Elliot asked, his voice tight. "What do you want from me?" Zara's eyes softened for a moment, as if she could sense his confusion, but her next words were serious, leaden with meaning. "We have waited centuries, human," she said, her gaze piercing. "You are the last of the first sparks." The words hung in the air like a weight, and Elliot felt his heart skip a beat. The first sparks. He had never heard of anything like that in his years of flying across the galaxy. His mind scrambled for some kind of explanation, but it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. He had no context, no frame of reference for the cryptic words she had just spoken. "What does that even mean?" Elliot demanded, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. The Queen stepped closer to him, her presence undeniable. The air around them seemed to shift, and Elliot instinctively took a small step back. But Sarah's gaze never left him, her eyes intense, searching, filled with ancient knowledge. "You are part of a legacy, a forgotten history," she said. "Long ago, your people were among the first to wield the power of the stars. You had the ability to shape the very fabric of the universe. But then, you vanished." Elliot's mind reeled at her words. He had heard of ancient civilizations, forgotten empires and lost technologies, but never anything like this. Was she talking about humans, his people? The idea that humans once had the power to change the stars was laughable. At least, that's what he thought. The human race wasn't some legendary force that could alter the course of the galaxy. Humans were just people, ordinary people trying to survive. "I don't understand," Elliot said, shaking his head. "I'm just a cargo pilot. I don't know anything about this first sparks business. I'm not some kind of hero." Zara's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was cool, almost soothing, but Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. "You may not remember it now, human," she said gently, "but you are one of them, and I have waited for you for far too long." Before Elliot could respond, a sudden loud crash echoed through the hangar, breaking the tension in the air. The warriors immediately moved into position, drawing their weapons. The Queen's posture stiffened, and Elliot's heart skipped a beat as he instinctively reached for his own blaster, but it was nowhere to be found. The warriors' weapons were far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. "What's happening?" Elliot demanded, his voice tight with fear. "The Corvian Empire," Xara said, her voice calm but filled with a sense of urgency. "They have found us." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. The Corvian Empire, the name alone sent a chill through his spine. He had heard rumors, whispers about the Empire's ruthless conquest of the galaxy, how they swept across worlds, destroying everything in their path. The idea that they were coming for him, for humanity, felt like a nightmare come to life. Xara turned toward her warriors, speaking in the alien tongue again. They nodded in response, moving swiftly to their positions. The Queen's gaze returned to Elliot, her eyes filled with a strange mix of determination and sorrow. "You were the key to our survival," she said softly. "And now, you must choose." Elliot's mind was spinning, his heart racing. He had come here on a routine cargo run, and now he was tangled in the web of an ancient war he couldn't begin to understand. But one thing was clear. The galaxy had its sights set on him, and there was no turning back. The ground beneath them shook as explosions rang out in the distance, and the hum of approaching Corvian ships filled the air. The time for questions was over. Elliot had to make a choice: run, or face whatever fate awaited him in the heart of this galactic conflict. And as the walls of the alien vessel trembled, Elliot knew one thing for sure: his life was never going to be the same again. The tremor that shook the ship was the first sign that the battle had begun. Elliot had been standing in the vast chamber of the alien vessel, his thoughts a whirlpool of confusion and disbelief, when the walls rattled and the ground beneath his boots shifted. A deep mechanical hum reverberated through the hall, followed by the unmistakable sound of distant explosions. The Corvian Empire had arrived. Elliot's pulse quickened as he turned to face Queen Xara. Her violet eyes were calm, but her stance was resolute. The regal figure of the alien queen was composed, as if she had expected this moment for centuries. Beside her, the warriors stood in perfect formation, their weapons drawn, their eyes sharp with anticipation. Elliot, however, was not prepared. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his blaster, but it was gone, taken from him the moment he had been dragged inside this strange ship. Xara's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, Elliot saw something new in her expression. Concern. Not for herself, but for him. "You must go, human," she said, her voice still smooth and melodic, but filled with an unmistakable urgency. "We have no time. The Corvian ships are closing in. They will not hesitate to destroy us." Elliot's mind raced. He had no idea what was happening, and nothing made sense. He was just a pilot, a man who transported cargo. Why was he being dragged into some ancient war? Why was the fate of the galaxy now tied to him? "I don't even know what's going on," Elliot muttered, his voice hoarse. "I'm not a soldier. I'm just a man." Queen Xara's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "You are not just a man, Elliot Trenton. You are the last of the first sparks. Your people were once more than mere mortals. The Corvians fear what you could become, and they will stop at nothing to destroy us." The words hung in the air like a dense fog, making it harder for Elliot to breathe. The Corvian Empire. He had heard of them. Of course. Whispers of their power, their unrelenting hunger for conquest. Entire planets had fallen under their control. But the idea that they feared humans, that they feared him, it was ludicrous. Elliot was just a man. just a pilot who had stumbled onto something he didn't understand. Before he could respond, the sound of a loud explosion shook the vessel again, and the walls around them flickered with red warning lights. The warriors moved quickly, preparing for battle, their dark armor gleaming in the dim light. Queen Psara turned to face the nearest warrior, a tall figure with glowing blue markings running along his exoskeleton. "Get him to safety," she commanded, her voice steady. "We cannot allow the Korgians to reach us." The warrior nodded and moved swiftly toward Iliad, his eyes unwavering as he extended a hand. Iliad hesitated for only a moment before taking the warrior's hand. There was no choice. The battle was here, and Iliad had no idea how to fight. All he had was his wits and his instincts. "Where are we going?" Iliad asked, his voice low as they hurried through the narrow corridors of the ship. "The escape vessels," the warrior replied, his voice a low growl. "The Queen has prepared a way out. We must reach them before it's too late." As they moved through the darkened hallways, the sound of explosions grew louder, the ship trembling beneath their feet. The air smelled of burnt metal and something sharp, a scent that reminded Iliad of dying stars. The walls of the vessel seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, like the very ship was alive and aware of the danger it faced. The warrior nodded and moved swiftly toward Iliad, his eyes unwavering as he extended a hand. Iliad hesitated for only a moment before taking the warrior's hand. There was no choice. The battle was here, and Iliad had no idea how to fight. All he had was his wits and his instincts. "Where are we going?" Iliad asked, his voice low as they hurried through the narrow corridors of the ship. "The escape vessels," the warrior replied, his voice a low growl. "The Queen has prepared a way out. We must reach them before it's too late." As they moved through the darkened hallways, the sound of explosions grew louder, the ship trembling beneath their feet. The air smelled of burnt metal and something sharp, a scent that reminded Iliad of dying stars. The walls of the vessel seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, like the very ship was alive and aware of the danger it faced. Iliad could hear the faint sound of combat in the distance. The Queen's warriors had engaged the Corvian forces. The ship's defense systems were online, but it was clear that they weren't strong enough to repel the full force of the Korgian invasion. The vessel was ancient, its systems outdated, and they were running out of time. The warrior led Iliad down a dark corridor, his steps silent, his posture rigid. They passed through several chambers, each one more damaged than the last. There were signs of a fierce struggle. The walls were scorched, and debris littered the floor. Iliad's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. But the more he tried, the more confused he became. "Where are the other survivors?" Iliad asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Is there anyone else?" The warrior's eyes narrowed, but he did not speak. The tension in the air thickened as they approached the ship's central chamber. The large, circular door slid open before them, revealing a sleek, dark-colored escape vessel. It was smaller than the alien ship but seemed more advanced. Its surfaces shimmered with an ethereal glow, and the engines hummed quietly, ready for launch. "This way," the warrior said, motioning for Iliad to enter the ship. Iliad hesitated for a moment, but he knew there was no other choice. He stepped into the vessel, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. The interior was compact, designed for quick departures. The walls were lined with alien symbols, glowing faintly, as if the ship itself was alive with power. The warrior followed him inside, moving to the control panel. He quickly activated the ship's systems, and the door to the chamber sealed shut behind them. Outside, Iliad could see the distant glow of Corvian warships in the black expanse of space. They were closing in, and time was running out. "We are not going to make it," Iliad muttered, his heart racing. The warrior looked at him, his expression unreadable. "We will." The ship's engines roared to life, and Iliad felt a surge of power as the vessel shot forward, leaving the alien ship behind. They were headed toward the unknown, toward a planet that was said to be the last sanctuary of the first sparks. But as they neared the planet's atmosphere, something else caught Elliot's attention. The Corvian ships had followed them, their dark shapes looming in the distance, ready to strike. A deep rumble echoed through the escape vessel, and the warrior turned to Elliot, his eyes sharp with focus. "Brace yourself," he said. "We are not alone." Elliot's breath caught in his throat as the planet below loomed larger, its surface shrouded in thick clouds and glowing rivers. He could feel the ship's systems struggling to hold together as they hurtled toward the atmosphere. The Corvian ships were closing in, and their weapons were charging. The battle had already begun. With a sudden jolt, the escape vessel broke through the planet's atmosphere, plunging into the thick clouds below. Elliot could see the massive landmasses of the planet, covered in dense forests and strange glowing plants. The planet was beautiful in its own way, but it was also dangerous, and the Corvian threat was far from over. "Where are we going?" Elliot asked, gripping the edge of his seat as the ship shook violently. "To Zinfar," the warrior replied, his voice steady. "The last refuge." Elliot felt a strange sense of calm wash over him as the ship descended into the jungle below. He wasn't sure what awaited him on this mysterious world, but one thing was certain: the fight for survival had only just begun. As the escape vessel touched down with a loud thud, Elliot took a deep breath, his heart still racing. The ground was damp beneath him, and the air was thick with moisture. He stepped out of the ship, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, mossy ground. The jungle around him was alive with sounds. Strange creatures flitted between the towering trees, their wings shimmering like liquid silver. Elliot looked around, unsure of what he was supposed to do next. The warrior stood beside him, his gaze scanning the surroundings with a practiced eye. "We need to move quickly," the warrior said, his voice low. "The Corvians will follow us." Elliot nodded, his mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded in the past few hours. He had gone from being a simple cargo pilot to a pawn in an ancient galactic war. And now, standing on a mysterious planet, he had no idea what to expect. But one thing was clear: the darkness was coming. The Corvian Empire would stop at nothing to find him. And the war was far from over. Elliot had barely processed the intensity of their landing before the jungle around him began to shift, reacting to the unseen threat that loomed on the horizon. He had just set foot on Zinfar, a planet untouched by the Corvian Empire for centuries, and the air was thick with energy, alive with an ancient power that pulsed beneath the soil. The lush trees that towered over him were alive with glowing symbols etched into their trunks, pulsating faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light. Every step he took felt like a journey into a forgotten history, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the planet itself was watching him. The warrior by his side moved silently, his eyes sharp, scanning the dense forest for any signs of danger. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as he followed the warrior deeper into the jungle. He had thought they were safe after landing, but a quick glance behind him confirmed his fear. The Corvian ships had already broken through the atmosphere and were now hovering above the jungle, their weapons charged and ready. The hunt for him had just begun, and Elliot had no idea how long they would be able to stay hidden. "Stay close," the warrior said, his voice a low growl. "We must reach the heart of the jungle before the Corvians find us. There, you will understand everything." Elliot nodded, but his mind was still racing. The warrior's words had no meaning to him yet, but he could feel the weight of them in the air. The jungle seemed alive with power, as if the land itself was trying to communicate with him, urging him to move forward. The ancient symbols that glowed in the trees, the strange humming sound that seemed to echo beneath the ground. It all felt too deliberate, too connected to be mere coincidence. Something was pulling him toward the heart of this planet, and it terrified him. As they walked, Elliot's thoughts drifted back to the Queen, to Queen Sarah's cryptic words. He was the last of the first sparks. What did that even mean? Was he truly connected to some ancient lost civilization that had once wielded the power to change the stars? Or was it all just a fantasy, a myth spun by a queen who had long since lost touch with reality? "Why me?" Iliad asked, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. "What makes me so special? I'm just a cargo pilot." The warrior glanced at him, his face expressionless beneath the shadow of his helmet. "You are more than you know, human," he said, his tone final. "The first sparks were your ancestors. They had power, knowledge, abilities beyond what you can imagine. They could harness the energy of the universe itself, shaping it to their will." Iliad shook his head, unable to accept what the warrior was saying. "I don't remember anything. I've never felt anything like that." The warrior didn't respond, but the silence spoke volumes. Iliad didn't need to understand everything. He just needed to survive. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a clearing, and in the center stood a massive stone structure, half buried beneath thick vines and foliage. The architecture was unlike anything Iliad had ever seen. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, each one depicting humanoid figures engaged in fierce battles, their weapons glowing with energy. The designs were so ancient, so alien, that Iliad could barely comprehend what they meant. "This is the heart of the jungle," the warrior said, his voice reverent. "Here, the power of the first sparks was sealed away. It is the source of everything. You will find what you seek here." Iliad approached the structure cautiously, his boots crunching the leaves beneath him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this place was more than just an ancient ruin. It was a living monument, holding secrets that had been buried for millennia. The carvings on the walls seemed to move as he passed, shifting and changing, revealing new scenes of destruction, of battle, and of power. At the center of the clearing, on a raised pedestal, stood a strange device, an intricately designed gauntlet, dark silver with veins of gold pulsing through it. Iliad felt drawn to it, his breath catching in his throat as the gauntlet seemed to call out to him. There was something about it that felt familiar, as if it had been waiting for him, just as Queen Xara had said. He approached the pedestal slowly, his hand trembling as he reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the gauntlet, a surge of energy coursed through him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as if he were floating outside his own body. The world around him faded, and in its place, he saw images, visions of ancient battles, of humans wielding the same power that now pulsed within the gauntlet. He saw warriors standing against impossible odds, their energy flashing like stars as they clashed with monstrous foes. And then the vision shifted. Iliad saw himself, his own face, but older, stronger, his hands crackling with the same golden energy that emanated from the gauntlet. He was fighting, leading the charge against an enemy force. The power he wielded was incredible, and in that moment, Iliad understood. He wasn't just a pilot, not just a man. He was part of something much larger, something that had been forgotten, buried beneath the weight of time. The vision faded, and Iliad gasped, his chest heaving with the force of the experience. The gauntlet had activated, responding to him as if it had recognized him. He stared at it, his mind racing. This was real. The power was real. The warrior stepped forward, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. "You are the last of the first sparks, Iliad Trenton. The gauntlet has chosen you. It responds to you because you are the heir to its power." Iliad could barely comprehend what the warrior was saying. His entire world had just shifted. He wasn't just a cargo pilot, wasn't just a man lost in space. He was a key figure in an ancient war, one that had been forgotten by time. And now, the gauntlet had chosen him, and with it came a power he didn't know how to control. "I don't know how to use this," Iliad said, his voice shaking. "I don't even know what it is." The warrior placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm. "You will learn. The power is already inside you, Iliad. You just need to trust it." Iliad closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He didn't feel like a warrior. He didn't feel like anything special. But the gauntlet was real. The power was real. And the Corvian Empire was coming for him, for the power he now wielded. In the distance, the faint hum of Corvian ships could be heard, their engines growing louder by the second. The jungle around them seemed to respond, the trees shaking as if they were preparing for battle. Iliad could feel the energy in the air, thick with tension and anticipation. This was it. The war that had been hidden in the shadows for so long was about to come to light. Iliad turned to the warrior, his eyes steady with determination. "What do I do now?" The warrior nodded. "Now you fight." The first sparks were not just warriors. They were protectors. The power you carry is the last hope for this galaxy. Use it wisely, and you may yet turn the tide. Iliad glanced at the gauntlet, feeling its weight on his arm. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol, a key to something ancient, something powerful. He had no choice but to embrace it, to use it. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was ready to fight. And the first sparks were about to rise again.